Morrow, Weyland-Yutani's cyborg enforcer. Now, when I tell you that this individual is not for play, he's just for real, I mean that at the highest level. This is one of the most dangerous characters that we've seen in this series among lots of very dangerous figures. Now, right up front, the important thing to know about him is that he's a cyborg, which makes him different than anything else we've seen in Weyland-Yutani's world previously, which have been AI robots like Bishop or even David, just levels of advancement. But this, being a cyborg, changes everything because he is still human. But he's a human mind that has been performance tuned for hardware and policy. So he's not Bishop, who had these baked in like ethical rails, and he's not David, a synthetic with a god complex curiosity that turned feral when he was isolated. He has human accountability, wearing machine discipline. And this kind of hybrid status lets the company outsource conscious without surrendering deniability. A person made the call. Functionally, he has three advantages over a pure synthetics. One is plausible deniability, like a human signature on ugly choices shields the brand from rogue AI headlines. He's also got adaptive cruelty. He can read subtext, shame, and fear, just like a regular person would. You know other people. Then he can weaponize it based on this computer intelligence brain, right? He's got this mutable morality, which, these upgrades help dampen his empathy. So they don't erase those things, but it gives him greater capacity to choose them and prioritize, say, corporate policies above everything else, which actually is scarier. So what they're doing is we're giving you free will, but it's been kind of like muted, anesthetized, like back in its like reset form. Nothing there, almost blank. So while Bishop is like duty bound, David is self-authored, Morrow is just pure corporate author. He's a man optimized to act like a robot when profit requires it, but to pass as a reasonable, when optics are on him, to pass as just being human. And that's really what it is. He's working both sides like magically. So his core concepts, like who he really is ruled by instrument over individuals. His identity is built on usefulness. So his brain is kind of rewired. He experiences worth when he closes loops, like recover an asset, neutralize a witness, box the biology. The cybernetics don't just amplify his strength, which is what I think we're used to. They stabilize his behavior. They give him reward loops for mission completion. This suppresses any intrinsic empathy are suppressed by that same system. And when you see him have a latency check before violence, this is like he's running the numbers. He's seeing if this calculates, and that's how he makes these decisions. So he calculates violence and other forms of being human as a part of the overall, hybrid pathology. So he practices like empathy, like he understands people enough from an empath level to be able to like guide and manipulate. So he does have a soft or velvet touch. They call it velvet glove interface over this iron operating system, right? He can be affable. He can be like elite at coercion. So because he's leveraging all the stuff that he knows about being human. And his main motivations, when we look at this guy, it's all about like control, containment, and continuity. And continuity or control hates variables. So like unlicensed samples running around out there crazy, rogue scientists, like super chatty survivors, all that's a threat to the system. He wants to contain. Knowledge and organisms belong in vaults. People are either containers, making them useful, or contaminants, which makes them liabilities. And then the main continuity is that no matter what, the company has to go on. This is the company man at the highest level. Individuals, including himself, are just consumable things, and he, rationalizes it out like that. So this is kind of this like real Machiavellian development of this particular character, because this has a long horizon, right? He's capable of doing things with low remorse, low reactivity. He values efficiency in the way that zealots value scripture. So he's all about doing this. And to mentally get a reward for being the company man goes higher than everything. It's like they can't get anything higher than that. So when you watch this guy, like everything is super, super deliberate. If he's kicking indoors, it's because something previously happened. like that went wrong. Like he prefers this, quiet coercion, contracts, custody transfers, pilot programs, violence when it's necessary, when it's instrumental. But for him, it's not just purely expressive. It's fast. It's deniable. It's under accident. So there's a lot that go on there. And the language of how he operates, like optimize, stabilize, they say contain instead of like arrest or whatever. They're playing the shell game, what they're really doing. And this is kind of the leverage that you get with this hybrid. Like everything about the whole system is really, really for show. Like it's all rigged to capture humans where they're most vulnerable. He's one of those where they're really leveraging, his relationship with the kids. And you can kind of see he has like flashes of an himself, which kind of makes it dangerous. He still has flashes of being human enough, so he does feel bad, but ultimately just gets pushed down. So there's a lot that's going on with this character. His narrative is like he's really different than anything we've seen in this series before, just in terms of how he thinks, how he operates, and we can really see this is just like he's a nightmare. He is, a biomedical ambition fused with this shareholder theology. That's what his core is. What makes the company the most money. And we've seen, this company, Weyland Yutani, been pushing towards that because that's ultimate they want. And I think he's the best, manifestation of that whole idea. So the bottom line is he isn't a robot pretending to be a man. He's a man engineered to be a robot when it pays, when it's useful. And his reward system for his brain is heavily rooted in that. So great character. Definitely looking forward to see more of those type of performances. Just well written, and if you have more you want to add to this character, just drop it in the comment section.